Hi, everybody, and welcome one more time to El Camino People, the podcast. And I say people, yes, because the Camino and every other Camino is always about the people. And sometimes the Camino de Santiago and the things we do in the Camino put you in touch with people all over the world with great projects, great stories. And today we are not going to be talking all about the Camino de Santiago, just a small piece, because today I'm going to present you two dear friends. One of them I met while we were doing a meeting in Santiago, and also he was hiking the Camino Santiago, but I will let him explain a little bit. Hi, Henry. Hi, Jay. How are you guys doing?
Greetings,
Good.
Jose.
Thanks
Good
for
to
having
see
us.
you.
So the other day I was seeing Henry. I'm like, it was 4 years ago already when the World Trails met in Santiago.
Yeah, no, in the capital Santiago, with all the walkers finishing their journeys, and the World Trails Network convened for their second or was it third conference? One of their conferences that happen every 2 years, and yeah, this is where we met.
We met, but all for the ones who don't know, World Trails Network is a world network of people that works and trails and all the trails all over the world. And if you haven't checked, go check the website. It's pretty cool stuff. Also, you can discover a lot of great projects all over the world. You can join the newsletter. Pretty cool things going on. But Henry, you did walk part of the Camino de Santiago when you were here with us.
I didn't take part in one of the pre-journeys because I was in Iceland running some projects up there and then came very quickly down to the conference. But after the conference, a friend and I went out to Finisterre and we walked a lot of the trails around there and did some biking on the crazy hills through the mountains there, which exhausted us. But yeah, it was great fun.
Yeah, what a great thing to do in Galicia. And Jay, you haven't walked the Camino de Santiago, but have you ever think about walking the Camino de Santiago or no yet in your proximate next things to do?
I've heard about it. The first time I really heard about the Camino de Santiago was with a dear friend Claudia, who told me about starting her journey, and then by the end of it, she was just walking with a sarong and a credit card and a toothbrush, and just how minimalistic her journey was for her. And as you might imagine, Henry and I guiding in Iceland and walking in Iceland and kind of where we met in South Africa, you need a lot more than a sarong and a credit card to get you anywhere.
Yeah,
So
I think a credit card is
in
not gonna
those
take you quite
difficult
far over there.
mountains,
Yeah,
you
credit
need,
card can
yeah,
take you quite
it's a
far
good
in the
dream.
Camino, but I don't think anywhere else.
Yeah.
So Henry and Jay, I think a good way maybe you can Jay, you can introduce Henry, and Henry, you can introduce Jay, and let us know how you guys met, what is your background, what you do.
So it's a decade this year since Henry and I first met in South Africa. I was preparing to walk on a trail called the Rim of Africa, which is outside of Cape Town, South Africa. And I had heard that someone from the UK was enthusiastic about coming down and he really loved foraging. And so he wanted to come and try to find what edible plants he could find out in the bush. Um, Having been a little bit familiar with the floor down there, I was like, oh man, this guy is going to be the hungriest person I meet while walking. Um, but once Henry and I met up and spent days walking together in South Africa, we really got along and enjoyed swimming in rivers and waterfalls and kind of pretending to be mountain goats prancing up on beautiful high ridge lines in the Cape Fold Mountains.
So what about Jay, Henry?
So yeah, as Jay said, we met roughly many years ago now, and have maintained a close friendship since then. And I invited him out to work on my project in Iceland to run trips with groups of volunteers, and that's where I really got to know Jay. He's got a very caring side, and that was very useful in our projects because there was just two of us often managing a group of say 13 people up in the mountains, and I took, I guess, responsibility for route finding without a map, and Jay picked up the pieces when we went wrong and people started getting scared and like, it's okay, if the people got blisters, Jay was there with his medipack, and yeah, we just had a very nice playful energy between us that speaks to Jay's uh, willingness to say yes to different situations and explore different realities. And yeah, we played nicely together for the most part for over 10 years.
So you both guys, your life has been always related with nature, hiking, and what is your background and what degree or how you've been working, how so we can make the trail all the way to Iceland.
Jay?
So my background is actually in anthropology. I am super fascinated by people and culture, and that is what I studied in undergrad, and kind of moved to Africa after doing my undergraduate degree in Baltimore to really kind of just explore and get to know as many different people and ways of being as I could. But I very quickly started getting sucked into the actually my passion in being outside and being in nature and realizing that conservation issues are getting
Hmm.
to a point where most of the work is truly in our relationship with nature and looking at culture and how we value nature in our lives as that place for making change. Um, so I've continually sought out projects that interface either with wildlife and human relationships, whether it's wolves in the Pacific Northwest, coyotes here in New York City, um, or in kind of vast open mountain landscapes in Iceland. I'm constantly trying to pull on these threads of how we value these things around us. Um, and that's kind of like some of the fodder that I'm thinking about as I'm outside enjoying myself in nature.
Wow, impressive. And what about you, Henry?
I wanted to study anthropology, but my good dear father has persuaded me to study something more serious. So I ended up doing biology. um, and then reverting back to anthropology anyway, Jay and I's work definitely falls within the kind of anthropological space of listening to the stories these different locations carry and like interpreting them in new ways and giving them new form. Um, but yeah, alongside that, I've been fascinated with psychology and how one's internal wildness overlaps with experiences had in wild places. And so that's kind of been my altar. I've turned up to that kind of space and looked to develop skill sets that facilitate other people's kind of experience in wilderness areas, but as much as a kind of internal journey as well. So.
Mhm. Nice. And so how someone, you Jay, you're from the States, you Henry, you're from the UK, you met in South Africa, and you ended up working in Iceland. How all that add together?
How did it happen? Facebook, of all things, it's a algorithm that sent me to Iceland. Um,
Really? So we have to say that Facebook did something good or not. It's
yeah,
yet to
no,
decide.
definitely.
Well, it certainly started a spark that has echoed. Thinking about how many people have made this journey because of, uh, I believe Henry had seen a Facebook ad for a university program in the Westfjords and said yes to it and ended up showing up there. And then from his studies, um, and having this idea for a hiking project in the Westfjords to really revitalize old herding routes that people use to get from town to town or with their sheep to other farms, like these old routes that were out there in the mountains that had kind of fallen off the radar as Instagram was really bringing everyone to, those hot spots of tourism activity. This was
Yeah.
certainly not close to those. And they're incredible places that still had immense value. And Henry invited me to come up there with him to start bringing, like, helping facilitate that process of bringing people out there and looking at these experiences maybe differently than they initially expected when they said yes to their trip. It was always an adventure. That is the one thing that happened every summer that we were out there.
But, one of the things that surprised me the most when we started working with the World Trails Network is how, trails here in Europe are man-made, but in the terms that it's been, a way to facilitate moving from one place to another or something else. When you talk about trails in the States, some of them are built for just the sole purpose of biking or hiking or some other. And that's a quick change, when you start talking about conversation and conservation of all of this. But when you think about Iceland, I'm like, you think about, the winter and, now with climate change, but trails over there must be pretty tough and rough and I'm like not really that the purpose. Mostly people, when we go to Iceland, the only thing we know is the typical hot spots that you were saying, or just do the whole tour around the island, but not really about the trails. Mostly people will think probably that where they're made or something, but they don't think about the story behind, like when we talk about the Camino de Santiago or the other more famous trails here in Europe.
Yeah, definitely. There are very few trails in the region that Jay and I have been working in that you can't necessarily see an imprint of the route on the land. They're often just a kind of memory passed between people as they discuss their sheep farming methods and which routes to take, or just a kind of familial kind of remembrance of how people used to move about the landscape before cars were introduced. So where we were mapping our old trails, we had to do quite a lot of historical research into actually where the trails were often, because you walk out on the land and often you just can't see anything. The most you'll maybe spot is a sunken cairn that's fallen over a period of like hundreds of years back into the landscape, and you can see a configuration of rocks that look slightly different, slightly more arranged than the surrounding rocks. And you can kind of like work out, there used to be a cairn here, so obviously it was an old walking route. But you're right, most of the trails in Iceland are very old, but not particularly well maintained out of the tourist areas.
And how do you start a project like this? And like you go, as we're saying, thanks to Facebook, you see this work opportunity in Iceland, but how suddenly do you decide and embark on a project? I'm like, it's not your hometown, it's not even your country, it's not even your language, it's something so wild that it's so unknown. Why, this whole thing? I'm like, both coming from so different apart, finally a common ground in Iceland.
I think it was actually the World Trails Network founder, or not founder, but chair for the last few years, and someone who gave Jay and I both an experience in South Africa on the Rim of Africa Trail, a guy called Galio Saints. I think, he inspired me, and I think Jay as well, in his approach of using trails as a mechanism to support conservation and environmental awareness. And it just really resonated with me. And for some reason, Iceland offered itself to my imagination as I was trying to start a life outside on trail, working with people. So
there's
Jay, what
certainly
about you?
space for it. That was one of the things that I feel like, in kind of getting engaged with this project, the region we were working in is known as the Westfjords. It's in the northwest of Iceland. If you're looking at Iceland, there's kind of the main round-ish island bit. And then in the northwest corner, it kind of just spikes out in all these fingers of very long fjords that kind of make their way out into the Atlantic and the Bering Strait. And that's where we were. And this is a region that's had a population crash over the last 100 years, where more and more people are moving to cities, whether it's the regional capital of Ísafjörður or down to Reykjavik or further into Europe. So a lot of these landscapes have kind of been losing people decade by decade by decade. And resultingly, there's this interest to, I think, have new ideas and to be able to see young people taking an interest in the resources that are still there, and especially if they're pointing back to the history and the cultures of that location. So when Henry and I would meet with people or be able to discuss this, resoundingly, most people were very enthusiastic about this idea and were, open to hear about groups walking across these routes, or finding out. Not only were we doing walking groups, but there are summers where Henry is saying these routes are kind of the memories of old ways of passing through. And one of those was by cairns, by stacking stones and piling them up to be about 2 meters high. Because the weather, if you've heard anything about Iceland, as you probably heard, the weather can be very intense. And so these stone piles were built to be able to navigate through those elements when there's no visibility, and they take a beating. So we did 2 summers of going out with groups to repair those cairns and repairing over 50 cairns over those trips. Um, and those type of experiences really, I think, um, excited the community to hear that people were out there helping repair it, because it's very easy to be lost in these old ways if they're not maintained. And that kind of ties back to Henry and I's shared interests and what does it mean to kind of take care of the landscape, but also to take care of the trail, and then how that kind of cares for the community. There's this cycle of reciprocity that can come through what it means to kind of have that engagement and think about the past, and also be able to support these cairn roots so that future walkers can come in and have that culture kind of infuse their walking. The Camino de Santiago as a pilgrimage is a very known, distinct, there's a magnetism that draws people in, and there's a shared experience that many people can relate to, no matter what year they walk the Camino. And that's something of taking a landscape, looking around and what was there, and how we can use kind of those local practices and the histories and what people would eat, how people would kind of survive in these conditions, and try to make that accessible again for people as they're walking.
Was there anything said, any like pre-study or any landmarks or anything that you can guys have, or there was not even like a map of the old network when you started?
No, there's some wonderful old maps that are still kind of peripherally available in the bookstores, the tourist office. But yeah, it was so there was 2 books. One of them was written by a farmer in the 70s, I believe,
Wow.
and he he had a tendency to walk off the edge of cliffs without much, or at least the routes that he was mapping suggested that one should walk off the edge of cliffs without much awareness or much room given to the ideas of safety. But apparently he had, I later found out that he had driven around the region, sat at the bottom of a mountain and estimated the best route up with a pen on a map. It's probably doing him a disservice, but that's what somebody told me. And it did bear out in reality when we tried to do some of these routes. They were kind of pretty sketchy and weren't really suitable for inexperienced walkers and for the tourist kind of market. And yeah, I'm just trying to remember what other. Oh yeah, and then there's just like a very thin paper map that you can buy, which it does have a very good level of information on. But yeah, combined with Iceland's tendency to be raining most of the time, they normally last less than about 4 hours, because as soon as they get wet, they disintegrate. So Jay and I had kind of spent hours putting sellotape over them, which did in fact work. So they were a good resource whilst we were mapping our routes. But yeah, our project was kind of born with the idea to create a long distance trail between Ísafjörður and Lautrabjarg, which is this stretch of sea cliff in the south of the region. And yeah, we tried to stitch together trails between those 2 points, which sit roughly 300 kilometers apart by foot. And yeah, it required a lot of troubleshooting, a lot of walking, some of the routes more than once. A lot of the routes that we walked didn't make it into our final guide. And yeah, so we've often walked those routes with groups of volunteers or artists or cairn builders, as Jay was describing earlier, worked on the routes or just mapped the routes and listened to the stories that they carry.
And that's one of the things. You arrive into Iceland, as we were saying, the Facebook, then you go into Iceland for work. And how do you start working, and bringing volunteers? Because one of the things probably, I don't know if there was like that, but when you are Jewish foreigners, working in a country, trying to promote something from the country, I'm like, I will guess that probably at the beginning was hard to explain to the people. I'm like, what the heck are you doing here? Bringing, to build on something that has been always been here, but it's not even a problem for us. So how do you start the process and the project? Because it was probably little by little grow into what we will talk later. That is the guy that you guys created.
Um, Initially, it was actually the idea to create a long distance trail was met with a lot of enthusiasm. As Jay was saying, I think due to the region experiencing a degree of economic decline, like new ideas were really enthusiastically and thirstily welcomed. And so yeah, I applied for some funding in collaboration with a couple of other local guide companies, and we got that very quickly. And we're then able to start walking with groups that we self-assembled, made a website, promoted it on social media, and invited people to come walk in the Westfjords. Some of our first group contained people who had never been hiking or camping before, and they'd signed up for 2 weeks wild walking and wild camping.
And working also, because at the beginning, I'm like, if you can go and see the pictures, it wasn't just hiking, it was just, rebuilding, no? And
yeah, no, it was there were like 10-foot snow banks, and yeah, we had to change the itinerary a little bit, but that was all part of the learning process, just to kind of work out what people were capable of and what the landscape demanded of us in terms of facilitators and leaders of these experiences. So yeah, it was a bit of a kind of steep learning curve, but yeah, we got a good idea of what routes were great after a couple of years, and then we moved the project into a different space and ran volunteer camps up in the mountains, typically with a teepee situated in one area, and then made little kind of day trips out to restore cairns and plant trees and walk some of the landscape. And that was funded by the European Conservation Association, European Outdoor Conservation Association, which is a member-based organization that raises funds for conservation projects. And we entered a public vote for that, won some funding, and then ran these projects together over a period of like 3 years. So.
And one of the things that we've seen lately is Iceland has, tourism has been growing like crazy. And like, I think the first time I went over there was 2007. And since then, it seems like it's the country that is cool. It's all been, all this tourist translating to hikers. So it's mostly, just the touristy version of the people that go there, not the hikers that go and will use the trails that you map.
Sorry, the question is, are they all hikers or?
Yeah, I'm like, have you seen more hikers as as the years evolve, and
I
Iceland is
see.
now one of the cool spots.
Yeah, no, the Westfjords is definitely getting slightly busier. It's still the least busy of the whole of the Icelandic kind of terrain, but the trails that Jay and I have been working on in 10 years of walking them and working with groups of volunteers, we've only seen 2 other people on the trails whilst walking, and they were 2 naked Polish boys who were skipping through the sunshine.
Iceland, in all those rocks, and I hope it was
There
summer.
is sunshine every now and then.
I know. If you go in the summer, that's the problem. There's no night. I was there during
exactly.
August, I think.
It's not a problem.
Yeah, but yeah, I guess that would be an interesting thing to observe, whether our project does have that impact of encouraging more people to walk on these old trails. That's one of our objectives. We've written a 4-part nature walking guide, and one of those parts is a trails map for the region, and another one is a small book called Notes on Walking. So yeah, we've definitely set ourselves up to encourage that. But yeah, we talk to a certain type or breed of person when it comes to walking. People who like being exposed.
Exposed as naked or just exposed?
There's also this massive, like you've acknowledged the tourism interest in Iceland, which is around the globe. People are showing up from all over the world to come see the lava and the hot springs and the waterfalls. And what's great is some people, they'll come multiple times, and maybe their first trip, they're doing the Golden Circle, just like everybody else. And then their second trip, they're coming to the Westfjords. And then their third trip, maybe they'll actually take a trail. And so I think it's these progressions of both. Sometimes it takes multiple steps to get people there. Other times, if you are someone who wants to step off the beaten trail and do your homework in advance, you can kind of shortcut your way through this. But it certainly is a progression that I think when we are in a small town in the Westfjords, every town almost has a swimming pool in town. You can go, you hang out, you meet people. And they're saying, I've been to Iceland a number of times, I've never been here. This is incredible. There's no one else here. And it's those people that are really looking for that experience that I think appeals to this. And really, our task was just trying to take whatever we've learned from the last years and years of being out there and distilling it in a way so that when people are ready to ask that question, this can help them make moves to get out there.
I agree with you. I
One of
think
my
that's,
favorite things in our
go
book
ahead.
is like foraging materials. And I think that is like, we were hitchhiking from the Westfjords back to Reykjavik, and we exchanged our ride for teaching these two American girls that, oh, this mountainside that you see, it's covered in blueberries. Like, you don't need to buy them in the shop. Just pull over, let's go out, let's grab all these blueberries, and we'll have a giant bag to snack on the rest of the way home. And there's so many things that are out there that are safely edible. We include those notes in our Notes in Ecology book. And it's that kind of like literal appetite to getting out there and experiencing those things that are really going to make the difference, I think. Beyond just walking a trail, you can literally bend down, identify sorrel, and add that to your salad, or at the edge of the water, identify seaweed and be able to try that and really start understanding, what life is like when you're mainly eating these local food groups.
That's what I was as you were saying, I think the Camino de Santiago is the same. A lot of people they go for the last 100K, because that's what they see and that's what is in promote. But then when they get the experience, they're like, oh, I want to do the Camino, the real Camino, the one that, those guys with the smiles are coming from, with the big backpacks, smelly. And, maybe this time I will carry my own backpack, and maybe I won't sleep in a hotel every night. I will try an albergue. But as I believe, as you, that the first contact is always going to be, the first touristy. And that's what we're seeing right now with Iceland, so huge. But one of the things that my guess is like how, the community you guys promote and they're now working on, how did you went from working on the Camino to this amazing, 3 books that you created thanks to the Kickstarter campaign? Like, we have the notes on ecology, the notes on walking, and the wayfinding that anyone, can get. And we have the website here if you want to check there, go wayfinding.guide. But how do you went from all your work to all of this work? Because I'm like, this is a ton of work.
Don't forget the map as well.
Also, yeah, I have it here. A map that, if it rains, it's still alive. It's really good.
Yeah,
I already
exactly.
tried it out. It's been raining here all day. It's been, and
And if
it
you
is,
buy two, it's a poncho. No.
yeah, but you never know. You know what? Sometimes it can be a good
Be
matter
a
of luck.
lifesaver. Yeah, no, it's true.
So tell us a little bit how this project, went into all of this great work that you guys are doing into, we want to make something that stays forever, kind of like something for people to keep on. And for the ones that are listening, the books are in English and in Icelandic. So do you guys speak Icelandic?
Yeah, ég tala íslensku.
Wow. Because that one is hard. I'm like, I don't know if I will be, ready to even write a book in English, but
No, I didn't write it in Icelandic. We had a translator.
okay.
Icelandic is a very difficult language, so I've been told to learn. We basically, it was our attempt to widen our invitation to get more people enjoying and walking in the Westfjords. And it's taken us a little longer than we first anticipated to reach the finish line. Basically, we ran these various projects. We'd identified the trails that we wanted to, stitch together into a long distance trail, but in reality found actually the landscape resists walking in a linear fashion because it's kind of cut in by deep fjords, and to get over to the other side often requires a kind of very circuitous route around the fjord. So yeah, we found ourselves actually just collecting walking routes that are just really magical and really, really beautiful and special, and offer something different to your normal touristic experience of Iceland or anywhere really, just in terms of they're not purely focused on the kind of recreational possibilities and attributes that modern trails typically try and orientate to. But they link together old farms, they carry old stories of like vicars walking the trail over a period of a lifetime, like hundreds of times, and a postman who's scrabbling over like frozen rocks along the shoreline all through the winter months. And yeah, so yeah, it was our way of trying to extend the knowledge that we had developed together and gathered together.
And I'll point out the smaller books that we have, the Notes on Walking and Notes on Ecology, they each share these stories, or like some of the stories that Henry's kind of alluding to about these routes, or in the ecology, it'll kind of give you an introduction to this animal, but also, you know, maybe a little fact about its historical use, or a foraging note, a recipe to include with it. There's just an incredible way to get to know the landscape through those little stories. And that's something that, you know, as we're walking, we constantly pick up these little stones and kind of just keep them with us. And this is that repository of those things. And the Wayfinding book, the bigger book, that's kind of like an art, photo, stories, poetry, and includes a lot of the stories that Henry and I would really guide with. And when we're talking about how stories weave together with the land, these are really those component parts that, as we're walking and following a route, we can talk about cairns. And as we rebuild them, we start to understand them a different way. And you start to ask questions of the stones in a new way. And so taking those lessons learned through that practice of stone making and infusing that into the writing and what we share was really so that even if we're not guiding folks that are out there, they can have these components to also walk with and be able to carry that kind of knowledge through the land and have their own experience.
So
Yeah.
what's Go ahead,
just
Henry.
to jump in quickly as well. I think, you know, just to develop that thread of thought as well. I think, yeah, I found myself feeling an immense responsibility in creating a representation of the Westfjords region itself, maybe partly due to being an outsider, and yeah, also just putting things, you know, so tangibly in a format that will last. You know, a digital format you can always wipe if you decide, okay, I've had enough of it. The books are there, yeah, as like kind of long-term invitations, and they don't contain kind of itineraries or information that will go out of date. So no local businesses or yeah, like it's essentially focused on ecology and walking and, like as Jay says, kind of creative practices that we ran on trail together. And so, yeah, we hope there's a kind of timeless quality to them. And that was kind of an intentional decision to try and weave that information together with our kind of creative processes, like as individuals and collectively together into that final product. So it's been, yeah, I would say it's been as much a kind of creative endeavor as it has been an attempt to create a functional, practical walking guide to the region as well.
But one of the things that, yeah, you were saying, you know, a lot of people will ask us, like, is this a walking guide? And as you were saying, you know, a walking companion, not something that you've read before. I'm like, you don't want to be hiking with this book, probably. Like, it's quite heavy. I'm like, the quality is
The
quite
two
good.
smaller ones are meant to be taken on trail with the map, but yeah, the big one definitely not.
We had initially conceived of this as one book, and it just really also resisted that. There was just no way to really give it justice and be able to make space for everything that we wanted to share within one kind of text. So that really led us to having these separate threads to kind of complement each other so well.
This is amazing.
It's
I'm
been
like,
an interesting project. Even in this itself has been a 5-year effort of really from starting to get organized to really outlining what would be in it, to the additional research and design and production and printing and funding and shipping and everything that's gone on. It's been an incredible life of its own alongside of this practice that was more land-based.
because really I haven't seen, anything like this in the Camino de Santiago. All the Camino de Santiago, there are memoirs, or they're, fiction, or they're just the average cheap guide. But I'm like, for the ones that I'm like, if you can see, this is, I'm like, the feeling, that the ending of the book, how you guys designed the interior. I don't know, for me, it takes me back to when I was a kid, the old books from school, from flowers, from plants, from animals. But the information, the pictures, they are so great, and the big book is just amazing. I'm like, it's the perfect reading book and the perfect, coffee table book for anyone that, I'm like, you haven't been in Iceland. I'm like, just the pictures, they will light up so many conversations, and the stories inside up for me. I haven't even just read a little bit, but it's amazing. I'm like, I don't know if maybe, I can throw you and, maybe do something like this for the Camino de Santiago.
We're waiting. Sign us up.
And one of the things that always talking about, for me, I'm a hiker. If I was first a hiker and then a pilgrim, I've been hiking all over my life, and I think the mix of both, they both offer different things. But both Henry, a little bit of the Camino Santiago. But how can the hiking in Iceland, relate to the Camino? What can people that is looking for something different, or why should people go to Iceland and hike in the Westfjords?
Well, I'll let Jay start, because he arrived to the conversation with some lovely reflections, having thought on this very point.
I've been thinking about the Camino de Santiago and its relationship to Iceland, and really baffled why no one else sees these connections. That the Camino de Santiago has been walked roughly the same amount of time over the last 1,000 years as Iceland has been settled. And while the landscape of the Camino certainly shows its wear and tear there, Iceland, these networks of trails that Henry and I include within the materials, I think allow people to have an experience where if they want to overnight in a tent and have that experience, they can certainly do so. You can also find a way of arriving in the West Fjords, probably by car or by ferry and car, and being able to have some more homestays or local hotels where you're able to go and experience these walks, but then come back into a town and kind of really fold yourself into the community in a way, rather than I live in America. When people really want to go backpacking, it's kind of this thing that's totally divorced from the rest of society. And that's not how this walk truly functions either. The mountaintops are only, a few hundred meters high. So none of the mountains are really going to take you more than half of a day or a few hours to walk up and over, and you can drop down to the other side. Because of glaciers, everything's kind of like capped off and flattened, and there's just these beautiful long open stretches of rocks covered in moss that make for perfect ambling, certainly in sunny weather, but even in the rain or in the swells. Like the weather of Iceland becomes a walking partner with you when you're out on these trails, and it folds into everything that you do, into your memories, into your dreams, into the entire experience of being there. Water and the weather is just omnipresent.
Yeah, and I think, another overlap would be the reasons for walking. People often have their own reasons for walking, but anyone choosing to step off or on trail in the Westfjords, I would be pretty confident in saying that there's probably quite a few overlaps in terms of like people walking to answer questions that they might be carrying about their lives and needing or finding the headspace out in a very kind of spacious, wild environment, releasing all of the clutter from their mind, and maybe some of the kind of distractions that come through living a life of comfort, or living life surrounded by comforts and distractions, and just like stripping it all down to the bare bones, and listening in for what's real and what's true. And yeah, I mean, from what I've heard of the Camino as well, it's probably a little bit more sociable, and you maybe find that answer in community along the Camino. But yeah, your community in the Westfjords is a kind of ecological community where you're deeply immersed in wildlife in the spring and summer months. It's just amazingly abundant. You've just got hundreds and thousands and millions of birds nesting on the land, and plants growing, and whales blowing in the sea. And yeah, it's a pretty abundant place at certain times of year.
And one of the things that I think the Camino Frances has is that it's ready for anyone. Anyone with no experience can go and hike the Camino de Santiago, and the Frances is the easiest one because you can do it with just a credit card. I'm like, you don't even need anything else. But when you're talking about going for hiking, a real hike in Iceland, and people that have been hiking even the Camino sometimes can be dangerous. People die in the Camino. But what are the steps? Can anybody go there and start hiking? Do you need a permit? Is there a network to start walking? I'm like, first of all, they need to buy your book for sure. But is there, like a stages created, or all those 300K that you guys were talking about?
Jay's good on safety things.
As the voice of safety within this project, if you've had experience in hiking and have a raincoat and are comfortable navigating with a map, I would say, grab your map, have your phone charged. A raincoat is a must always. Some water and snacks, and you're free to move about the country. There is really great walking routes that we detail to just invite people to go. That was one of our things. The routes we've included, for the most part, are much more approachable to these people who are starting their journeys there. And once you become acquainted, you can start exploring from those edges. If you are brand new to these type of experiences, but very enthusiastic, I would recommend you get to Isafjordur and ask around. They have tourism information there and in Patricksfjordur, and you can find yourself a guide company to go with, find a group of people equally as enthusiastic to go with you. And you know what? If Icelandic horses are your things, you can even go on horseback if you wish in some of the valleys. There's many ways to get out there. One of the other unique things that we have tried to provide a nod to is kayaking within our materials, because going by sea, which can have its own perils, is still something that is very resonant within the history of the area. And so there are also kayaking providers, and more recently, biking is getting more and more support within the area for following old roads that are no longer used nearly as much as the newer, smooth highways that can tunnel through mountains. But there's also more bike tracks being built with infrastructure so that you can find your way on mountain bikes through this incredible region. So there's so many options to get out there, and companies that are there located in towns to help you get there.
You guys do, as you were saying, you do guided groups during the summer or during the winter, or how do they work, your guided groups?
I mean, basically we ran projects in Iceland during the summer months, but since working on the books, we haven't actually been running projects on the ground. It overlaps quite fortuitously with the pandemic, when we wouldn't have been able to run projects anyway. So we actually had a nice kind of online project to do during that time. We're discussing whether to run trips next autumn. So yeah, if you want us to guide you, sign up to our mailing list on wayfinding.guide, and we'll keep you up to date with any opportunities there.
It's amazing, yeah. And also, they've been so kind of giving a code for anyone that can to get the 3 books, 2 books, a small one, the map that hasn't get wet, and the amazing great book. So if you want, you can go wayfinding.guide and you have the code Camino for 15 off. So for anyone that you haven't been in Iceland, I'm like, it's incredible. If you want to give, I will say it was the perfect next step into backpacking, because as we're saying, the Camino Santiago is a pilgrimage, easy walk, even if you do the Camino de Pie de la Plata or anything else is so different that, going out there, I'm like, you can see Jay's picture on the back and we'll put more pictures on the post because I'm like, that's Iceland. I'm like, it's just incredible. And as you were saying, also, it's great, it's safe. There's the people over there, they're amazing. They all speak really good English. I was quite surprised the first time I was there. And it's quite a country to discover, and once you check the books and the pictures, and if you're looking for a next experience and something different, I guess Iceland have it all. And as you were saying, the beautiful of your project is that's based on people, culture and all these things that at the end is what make all these trails incredible, because without people they're just nothing, they wouldn't be there.
Yeah, very true.
They'll just be walked by the sheep. So
and the sheep with no people, they will be, I don't think they will walk.
You're right. They just munch on everything.
Yeah, there was a story of a group of sheep in the Westfjords that went feral, like completely wild, for about 4 or 5 years, and the farmers eventually decided enough was enough. Like, these sheep are just like, they're taking the piss. They might even be recruiting new members into their wild clan, and they're growing. They're taking over this little mountain over here. And so they sent out a bunch of farmers one autumn and chased these poor sheep back into the sheep shed. Or some of the sheep elected to just jump off the cliff and like, not doing it, not coming back inside, and just like threw themselves off the cliff. But yeah, there was stories that some of their legs had grown longer, and
I heard stories of them shoving other sheep off the cliffs. The poor domestic sheep, they just, they were bullies. They were very mean and wild feral sheep that refused to come down. So these landscapes are filled with stories, and it's something people can really enjoy.
What is the most beautiful story of someone that you have met, the Camino? You were talking about the mailman here in Spain. Just now they created the route for the old mailman that used to go from village. Now it's a walking route. But what is the most beautiful story about someone that you have met over there in Iceland?
Good question. Let's see.
Beautiful is tricky.
Okay.
Or just interesting, or different, or more unique.
Well, yeah, it relates to sheep. Chapter 6 of our Wayfinding book is titled Wool, and it features a good friend called Betty and her son Thor. Betty lives in a valley that was once populated by 200 people, and now she is the only year-round inhabitant of this enormous valley, and she gets completely cut off in the winter months. So she's out there for like 4 to 6 months by herself, with the occasional snowmobile coming over to deliver her milk and meat and other things that she needs from the shops. But otherwise, she sits watching these northern gales and winter storms arrive on the beach. Her house is overlooking a very beautiful beach called Ingolsandur. And it's great for surfing. It's great to go and chase sheep in. And it's just like one massive magical prism of opportunity and like magic that, yeah, you can just go and immerse yourself in. And it's where I had my first Icelandic horse ride. It's where we've guided many of our groups, and there's loads of walking to be done there. And Betty's always got a very big smile on her face, welcoming you into her house and giving you coffee and food. And she's a great knitter as well, so you can pick yourself up some like wrist warmers and a jumper whilst you're there.
That's amazing. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for sharing your story, and opening us to different caminos worldwide and to the stories of the people. That's the most intriguing part, and how you guys ended up there. And now you're part of that story, and you're part of the Icelandic, and your books are a part even bigger. And we hope that everybody, the ones there, and remember, go check wayfinding.guide and check in you guys have on Instagram, Facebook, and the normal. Are you on TikTok or no yet?
Please don't make us go on TikTok.
Henry will be in charge of the detail. But seriously, I'm like, I haven't seen anything like this done on the Camino de Santiago, so I'm just throwing you a bone over there. But and some other
Amazing.
caminos,
Yeah, if you
And
know where to get funding, then please point us.
I throw the ideas, then you guys work on the funding.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, and keep us in, with the next trips. I'm like, I have a quite interesting summer next year, hopefully. But Iceland is quite easy to get in, and the only thing is getting more expensive and more expensive lately. But it's one of the things that I really want to go back and have the experience. The Westfjords with you guys will be amazing. So, hopefully one day. And to everyone, remember, go check the website, and if you fell in love, contact Jay or Henry in any of the social accounts, and they will gladly, answer your questions and give you some feedback on how to go into Iceland.
Thanks, Jose.
And how do you say in Icelandic, buen camino?
Like good walk or?
Yeah, good walk or something like that. How do we say that?
Go the fifth. Tuck free and bless.
So that, buen camino to everyone. Ultreya.
Bye.